close. Close enough for a sword.
Sir, the Imperial Army of Japan demands your surrender. If you and your fellows lay down your arms, you will not be harmed.
I'll look for you on the field.
The Last Samurai depicts 19th century Japan, a time when the island nation opened its doors to the West, causing a titanic struggle between 1,000 years of tradition and the onrush of the modern world. At the heart of this struggle were Japan's elite warriors, the samurai. But how does Hollywood's version of history compare with history itself? We'll hear from the keepers of the historical record.
They could stand in the stirrups, lean out in front of the horse, over the head of the horse, and lay about like this, just cutting up their adversary.
The film's director, Ed Zwick.
There was an edict issued in which samurai were asked to give up their swords, and it was the final indignity.
And from Hollywood's biggest, brightest star, Tom Cruise.
See a man, see your enemy, and deal with your enemy in front of you. And that is his destiny or your destiny, to live or to die.
Plus, is it or isn't it? Our surprise ending. Find out what's history and what's Hollywood. Next.
Rifles at the ready!
At the beginning of the film, I don't start out as a samurai warrior. I'm a ex-captain in the cavalry.
How many other genuine heroes you got lined up?
You know, the character was someone who had integrity at one point and became dishonored, and is suffering in a way that that a soldier suffers, for someone who has seen so much death, so much violence, and can't escape it. With Captain Algren, he's an explosion waiting to happen, and someone who's quite tortured about where he is, but he's not someone who wears that on his sleeve. It's very much under the surface. He's a laconic, tacit character. He's hired by Japanese, which at this time period in history, the Japanese went out and they spoke to the French, the Germans, the English, the Americans, trying and studied different educational systems, different political systems to try to unify their country.
Japan's got it in mind to hire experts to train their army.
We will pay you $400 a month.
5.
And so I was hired to go and train the Emperor's army on modern warfare.
Assume firing position!
It's what he does best. He is a soldier. You feel the concern that he has for these men, yet it's his responsibility to try to teach them how to stay alive and be efficient. He knows that by training them to be efficient, they're going to have a greater chance of survival. So there's always that internal conflict. It's not just, Algren isn't just going one way. He's very conflicted about life, about what he's doing, about warfare. But he's lost, and so hence the clash of Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy hit head-on in a battle.
The Last Samurai, starring Tom Cruise, explores a special breed of warriors who were respected, feared, and ultimately doomed to extinction. The samurai emerged as a powerful force in the Middle Ages, when Japan was ruled by hundreds of lords, each with his own corps of samurai.
There's this sense of service, this sense that you are what you do for your lord. And then there's a sense of being prepared for death, that if you are in every moment ready to die, then you're really ready to live.
The samurai were elite warriors trained at special schools where they were transformed from boys as young as 7 into fighting machines. At their side, the curved and lethal swords considered the soul of a samurai. Other trademarks were a shaved head and the code of honor known as Bushido.
The rough Western equivalent to Bushido is chivalry. This idea that no matter what you're doing, if you do it with honor, and with courage and with valor, you're a cut above, you're a knight, you're a samurai.
For more than 5 centuries, the samurai dominated Japan. They were indispensable to their lords, feared by everyday people.
For most of the Japanese population, the samurai were a government elite, and a lot of ways they were intimidating, and in a lot of ways Japanese looked at them the way people look at, you know, an unelected government. So there were parts about the samurai that weren't that glorious.
But however intimidating, the samurai couldn't hold back the tide of history. In the late 1800s, Japan was about to enter the modern world, a world in which ancient warriors were no longer needed. The Last Samurai focuses on this era, when one way of life was ending, another was taking its place, with the samurai caught in the middle.
To put the role of the samurai in context, it's important to learn more about the history of Japan.
The Last Samurai is set in an age that was nothing short of revolutionary. For centuries, Japan had been ruled by an emperor, considered not merely a man, but a god. Because the emperor was above day-to-day governing, the country was actually controlled by another man, the shogun.
European visitors to Japan in the 1500s and the 1600s, trying to explain to other Europeans what Japan was like, they referred to the Japanese emperor as the Pope of Japan, because they were trying to get this sense of someone who was sacred and revered but had almost no political power. And they referred to the shogun of Japan as the emperor of Japan.
The shogun was dictator of the people, commander-in-chief of the military. This system endured centuries when Japan was isolated from the rest of the world. But the beginning of the end for the shogun and the samurai came in 1853, when American ships under Commodore Matthew Perry steamed into Japan. Perry carried a letter from President Millard Fillmore asking Japan to open its harbors and to join the family of civilized nations. The Japanese realized their feudal system was holding them back. They needed to modernize. The last shogun resigned in 1867, and Japan began a tumultuous transformation. As for the samurai, their salaries were cut in half, and they were replaced by a modern army. The cruelest cut of all came when it was declared illegal to wear the famous sword. Thousands of samurai staged a rebellion and put up a gallant fight, following their code of honor to the end. But as the film The Last Samurai depicts, they were eventually crushed. And after hundreds of years, the samurai's privileged place in Japanese society was finally over.
Let's hear more from the star and producer of The Last Samurai, Tom Cruise, and its director, Ed Zwick.
I looked at 3 centuries of Japanese history, trying to glean anything I can about the culture, behavior, attitudes, and try to get it from all different kinds of different viewpoints. Because, you know, history is, you have first-hand data, that which you experience yourself, second-hand data, that which someone experiences and tells you about, and then third-hand data, which is, way out there. And a lot of history is when you read it, it's diverse, different opinions from the same experience. It was after Commodore Perry came in for the first time and he was turned away for trade. At that time, if you ventured, on the shores of Japan, you were instantly beheaded on the spot. You were killed if you were a foreigner. You were not welcomed. And then in '53, recognizing the amount of wealth in the country and wanting trade with the country, Perry came in. He was turned away in '53 and came back in 1854 with a fleet and fired off the guns in their harbor in Edo, which at that time later became Tokyo.
It was this horrific shot across the bow, and the entire nation didn't know how to react because the samurai who had been empowered with defending, the shogunate, were incapable of responding to this technological terror.
That really changed Japan at that point. They, by the thousands, stood upon the shores looking at these gunboats, wondering what has come down from the heavens. And they realized we better change here. We better figure out what to do.
Within 10 or 15 years, the shogunate fell. Many of the samurai, the more enlightened samurai, realized that in fact their rule was obsolete, that what was needed was some strong national impulse and everything that came along with that, the creation of an imperial army, the consolidation of resources, the creation of railroads and any number of industrial growth. And it began at that moment, this notion that they could partake of what the West had to offer in technology, and yet, using what the West had to offer, eventually beat the West at its own game.
You know, you look at that small island and what they created for themselves and how they unified that country. It's the power and the culture. It's extraordinary culture. It is an ancient culture steeped in mythology, steeped in great wisdom also. You look at how today the resonance of that culture still is there.
The Last Samurai looks at two dying breeds, the samurai warriors and the shoguns who had ruled for centuries. In 1868, all power was transferred to a 15-year-old emperor who was declared the true and divine ruler. He took over a country that had no banks, no telegraph wires, not a single printing press. The emperor invited Dutch engineers, British sailors, and American educators to Japan, while sending his own officials to study in the U.S.
Clothing changed, food changed, all these aspects of daily life changed. It wasn't that there was just a change in government. What you smelled walking down the street changed. There was really a sense that a way of life, a world, disappeared in a matter of 15 years.
The goal: build a modern nation and turn Japan from a land of the samurai to an industrial and military power. In one sense, the restoration worked too well. Japan became a military colossus.
What happens in the 1860s and really the 1870s is the new Meiji government abolishes the samurai class. But they don't abolish the samurai code. The samurai themselves disappear, but some of the things they believe in become part of Japanese national mythology and the Japanese national spirit.
The once isolated nation came to dominate Asia, and it took a world war to stop Japanese expansion. After that war, General Douglas MacArthur banished all remnants of Japanese militarism. Citizens were ordered to give up their weapons, even the samurai swords that were heirlooms and symbols of Japanese strength.
We've talked about the weapons that the samurai had. We just learned some more about Japanese history. But in your estimation, is The Last Samurai more history or more Hollywood?
Well, that's a bit of both. I mean, the historical context is beautiful. I mean, they do a great job of recreating the Meiji state with all the pomp and the uniforms and the steady inflow of foreign advisors to push them into Western ways. At the same time, they do a great job of describing the samurai in their villages and the whole caste and pecking order in these villages. And it just is a wonderful picture of 19th century Japan, but I think it's in the substance of this film that you see real Hollywoodization. Because let's face it, the samurai in this 1876-77 were the bad guys. They were reactionaries, trying to go back to a bygone time when women didn't have rights, when there was no hope of democracy, when there was a real caste system in the Japanese villages where you had untouchable people who were discriminated against. And the Meiji government was trying to change that. In fact, a lot of these conscript soldiers who are coming down and shooting at the samurai in the film, these are actually the good guys, guys that are trying to inculcate a kind of democracy in Japan.
And what do you want?
To know my enemy.
I've seen what you do to your enemies.
Many of our customs seem strange to you, and the same is true of yours.
Well, Bushido, the way the samurai, the way the warrior is, encompasses all of life. A warrior is someone who certainly, through training, becomes more powerful than the average man. But yet they also recognize that with power, with any kind of power, and it's a metaphor for any kind of power, there is a great responsibility, which is something that I find incredibly compelling about compassion, about recognizing that you are more powerful and that you must take responsibility for everything you do, everything you say, every breath you take. There's some great values in Bushido, and I think that that is definitely embodied in this picture. and the reason I wanted to make a film like this, because it's an action-adventure movie, but it's about themes that greatly interest me and that that are very dear to me as a man. Loyalty, compassion, taking responsibility for everything that you say and everything that you do. In the East, they recognized thousands of years ago that man wasn't a body. Man was a spiritual being. Recognized that. And that through training also to be able to have, put yourself in such a state where the mind is controlling the body. It was extensive, the kind of training I did, but it aided the character, because even with the transformation that I was making, it's the same transformation, in terms of being able to move a certain way and that whole ability to have the mind move the body and not think about it. And suddenly, I'm moving faster and more precise than I ever thought possible. And no one got hurt, which is a miracle in itself, because even though they're not as sharp, those things will cut your finger off. It'll easily dig your eye out or cut your nose off the speed they're traveling.
Hi, great. Worth doing. Great.
Fabulous.
You see at this time period how the samurai was dying out, how they were being crushed out of history, actually, at that point during the Meiji time period, the elimination of the samurai.
The age of the warrior was ending and the age of the soldier was beginning. A soldier is essentially anonymous within his regiment, within his army. A warrior is individually possessed of this extraordinary autonomy and training.
The sword the samurai believed was his soul, or embodied the spirit of the one who carried it before. And for Katsumoto in our film, he feels that this is his ancestors. It embodies the soul, the spirit of his ancestors.
There's a wonderful samurai adage which says the sword is in the man. The idea that a samurai sword is in some sense this embodiment of the discipline and yet the flexibility, the lethality and yet the aesthetic beauty. These swords would take, many of them would take over a year to make.
The sword is a real engineering feat. It is the lightest sword, it is the sharpest sword, it is the strongest, most flexible sword. It's something that they developed over 1,200 years ago.
What happened, of course, during this period in which our story takes place, is there was an edict issued in which samurai were asked to give up their swords, and it was the final indignity. Because for a samurai to give up his sword was essentially to give up that connection to his birthright, to 700 years of his ancestry.
The samurai would not dishonor themselves by using a weapon. They used the sword. And for them it was see a man, see your enemy, and deal with your enemy in front of you. And that is his destiny or your destiny, to live or to die. And that is what being a warrior is.
The fact that the samurai is not only the monolith of fighting and swordplay that it's been described to be, but that it has a great philosophical component, a wonderful artistic and aesthetic component, a poetic one, and a very spiritual one.
Ultimately, though, is the film history or Hollywood?
The Last Samurai is Historywood. I think Hollywood, when it partakes of history, has an obligation to get things right and not to Bowdlerize it. But I'm not presuming to give a history lesson.
It is a celebration of that culture and the death and life of that culture. And a great, tremendous amount of hours, effort went into honoring that and spending time, with the sets, the wardrobe, the behavior, to minute details.
There's a wonderful expression, I think it's a Zuni proverb, that said, there are no truths, there are only stories. And I believe one way that we actually learn about life is in the telling of stories. I think many more people learn moral precepts or narrative truth, not through books and not in any academic way.
Now, this is an adventure picture, but it does take you into that world. It was a pivotal time in their history where it changed from the Eastern to the Western, where the kimonos then into the hats and the caps and the top knots were outlawed. All that stuff is very true and very true to that time. It's sweeping epic and very personal on the other hand. And yet when you see the film, it is what I have found and love about that culture.
Hollywood filmmakers use lights, cameras, and 21st century technology to transport filmgoers back in time. In this case, back to 19th century Japan. With that in mind, see The Last Samurai and judge for yourself whether it's history or Hollywood. And by the way, the next time you find yourself strolling in New York City, visit the Japanese Garden here at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. It too is an experience that can transport you to another time at another place, just like a well-made Hollywood film. Taxi! For the History Channel, I'm Josh Binswanger. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks for staying.
Thanks a lot, man. My pleasure.